Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure you're part of our journey. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and get ready for a story that will leave you thinking. And if you love inspiring tales, a like goes a long way. Next customer, please. The words cut through the room as harshly as the winter wind outside. The elderly woman's hands trembled, her carefully organized folder of documents suddenly seeming inadequate against the bureaucratic wall before her. Her voice quivered, "But I've been waiting since dawn." The social services office hummed with the quiet desperation of 40 people waiting their turn. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everyone in the same sickly, pale glow. Outside, rain pelted against windows smudged with fingerprints from countless others who had leaned against them, waiting, hoping. The woman at the counter stood frozen, her dignity hanging by a thread. "Rules are rules," the clerk announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Without Form 5B properly completed, we cannot process your assistance." The elderly woman's eyes welled with tears as she clutched her folder. In the back of the line, a man in a worn, dark coat lowered his book, his attention caught by the tremor in the clerk's voice, a hint of satisfaction in the rejection. If this moment made you feel something, imagine what's coming next. Hit that like button and stay with us. Subscribe now. The woman was 78. Her blue cardigan buttoned meticulously despite one missing button that she'd carefully hidden behind her folder. The clerk, no older than 30, had already shifted her attention to her computer screen, the elderly woman becoming invisible in an instant. "I've completed everything they told me last time," the woman explained, her voice softer now, embarrassment warming her cheeks. "My heat was turned off yesterday." No response came from behind the counter. A few people in line shuffled uncomfortably, their eyes finding sudden interest in their phones or the scuffed linoleum floor. The unspoken agreement: don't get involved, don't make waves, don't risk your own place in line. The clerk's voice hardened. "If you can't follow simple instructions, perhaps you should have someone else handle your affairs." Each word landed like a slap. Someone in line coughed awkwardly. Another checked their watch. The elderly woman's shoulders hunched forward as if physically struck, her weathered hands gripping her folder tighter, knuckles whitening. Decades of dignity seemed to drain from her frame in seconds. "I don't have anyone," she whispered, but the clerk was already gesturing to security. The uniformed guard stepped forward reluctantly, his expression caught between duty and discomfort. "Ma'am, you'll need to step aside." The tension in the room thickened as the unspoken question hung in the air. Would anyone say something? In the back of the line, the man in the dark coat pocketed his book. His movement was deliberate, unhurried, yet somehow magnetic enough that several people noticed, a ripple of awareness spreading through the room. Something about his stance, shoulders straight but not stiff, hands relaxed at his sides, carried a quiet confidence that didn't announce itself but couldn't be ignored. The security guard had just placed his hand on the elderly woman's elbow when the man spoke. "Excuse me." Just 2 words, spoken softly, yet they carried through the room with surprising clarity. The guard paused. The clerk looked up, irritation flashing across her face at this deviation from procedure. The elderly woman turned, her eyes still glistening with unshed tears. No one recognized him immediately with his beard and slightly too long hair, but something about his voice made everyone listen. "Things are about to take a turn. Don't miss what happens next. Subscribe, like our video, and keep watching." The man moved forward with a fluid grace that parted the line without resistance. No one objected. Something in his movement suggested purpose rather than entitlement. As he approached the counter, facial recognition kicked in across the room. First from a teenage girl who gasped softly, then spreading in whispers, Is that? Can't be. It's him. Keanu Reeves stood beside the elderly woman, his presence both ordinary and extraordinary at once. "I believe this woman needs assistance," he said, his voice carrying that distinctive gentle resonance fans would recognize instantly. The clerk stared, her professional detachment faltering. "Mr. Reeves, we have procedures." She straightened her nameplate defensively. "Without Form 5B completed correctly, we can't process her claim. It's policy." Keanu nodded thoughtfully as if considering a profound philosophical point rather than bureaucratic inflexibility. "Policy," he repeated, the word hanging in the air between them. "May I?" Keanu gently asked the woman, gesturing to her folder. She nodded, surrendering it with trembling hands. He opened it carefully, treating its contents with a reverence that made the clerk's dismissal seem even more callous by comparison. Phones emerged throughout the waiting room, recording discreetly. Keanu studied the papers with genuine concentration, then looked up. "Everything seems to be here except this Form 5B. The clerk shifted uncomfortably. "It's required. Everyone knows that." Keanu tilted his head slightly. "Mrs. Adams," the elderly woman supplied. "Margaret Adams." "Mrs. Adams may not have known," he said simply. "Nobody told me," Margaret confirmed, her voice strengthening slightly in his presence. "I asked last time what I needed and they gave me a list. I checked off everything." The clerk's jaw tightened. "It's on our website." "Does Mrs. Adams look like she navigates websites regularly?" Keanu asked softly, not accusingly, but with a genuineness that made the question impossible to dismiss. He turned to face the room, his expression thoughtful. "Does anyone have a pen?" The question wasn't theatrical. It was practical, humble. 3 pens appeared instantly. He selected one with a quiet "thank you" that somehow conveyed profound gratitude for this simple gesture. Turning to the clerk, his voice remained gentle but carried an undercurrent of unmovable resolve. "Could we have Form 5B, please?" The clerk hesitated, caught between protocol and the growing awareness that everyone in the room, including numerous phone cameras, was watching. Social media was already lighting up. Outside the building's windows, a small crowd had begun to gather. The power dynamics had shifted imperceptibly but completely. With visible reluctance, she pulled out the form and slid it across the counter. "This story is only getting deeper. What would you do in this situation? Comment below, and let's talk." Keanu guided Margaret to a nearby chair, kneeling beside her to place the form on his knee as a makeshift writing surface. "Let me help you with this," he said, positioning the pen in her shaking hand, his own hand steadying hers, not taking over, but supporting. Together they filled out the form, his patience never wavering as she carefully printed each letter. The room had fallen completely silent, the everyday drama unfolding more compelling than any movie scene. Even the clerk watched, her expression now uncertain. When they finished, Keanu walked Margaret back to the counter, standing beside her not as a celebrity throwing his weight around, but as a fellow human being offering solidarity. He handed over the completed form with a small nod. "I believe everything is in order now." The clerk examined it slowly, desperately seeking any mistake, any reason to maintain her position. Finding none, she reached for a stamp with visible reluctance. "There's still a 5-day processing period," she stated, a final assertion of control. Keanu nodded thoughtfully. "And in those 5 days?" "Standard procedure," she replied, not meeting his eyes. "And Mrs. Adams's heat?" He pressed gently. "That's been off since yesterday." Margaret's voice was barely audible as she added, "It's supposed to snow tonight." The clerk's fingers stopped moving. For the first time, she looked at Margaret directly, seeing not an inconvenience but a human being. Something in Keanu's quiet presence made looking away impossible. The witnessing crowd held its collective breath. The clerk reached for her phone, made a call. "This is Sandra in processing. I need an emergency override for client Margaret Adams." She listened, then continued with newfound conviction. "Yes, I'm authorizing it personally. Heat restoration today. Yes, I'll take responsibility." She hung up and looked at Margaret. "They'll have your heat back on within 3 hours." Tears welled in Margaret's eyes, but these were different from before. Not of humiliation, but relief. "Thank you," she whispered, her dignity restored. The clerk nodded, then looked up at Keanu. "Thank you," she added, something shifting in her understanding. He shook his head slightly. "You made the right choice. That's all yours." Around them, people had stopped pretending not to watch. Phones recorded openly now, but there was a respectful distance, a recognition that they were witnessing something authentic rather than performative. Keanu helped Margaret gather her documents, slipping them carefully back into her folder. "Do you have a way home, Mrs. Adams?" he asked. "The bus," she replied. He glanced outside at the strengthening rain. "May I give you a ride?" he offered with such genuine simplicity that it couldn't be mistaken for anything but human kindness. Margaret looked up at him, her eyes clear now. "You've done enough, young man. But I won't say no. It's not over yet. The best part is coming. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it." As they walked toward the exit, the crowd parted respectfully. No one rushed forward for autographs or selfies. Somehow, the moment demanded more dignity than that. Outside, the gathered crowd was larger now, news having spread through social media. Camera flashes illuminated the rain as Keanu guided Margaret to his car, shielding her with his coat. He opened the passenger door for her with the same care he might show to any elder, famous or not. Before getting in himself, he turned to address the clerk who had followed them to the door. "Maybe put information about Form 5B in your welcome packet?" he suggested gently. The clerk nodded, a flush of shame and resolution coloring her cheeks. "I'll make sure that happens today," she promised, her voice steady with newfound purpose. By evening, the video had spread across all platforms. Comments flooded in. Not the usual celebrity worship, but something different. Stories of small kindnesses, of bureaucratic walls broken by human compassion. The Social Services Office issued a statement about improving their processes, even as their website crashed from unprecedented traffic. Margaret's heating was restored within 2 hours. Several local businesses contacted the office offering to create a fund for emergency utility assistance. The clerk, Sandra, gave an interview to the local paper. It wasn't about him being famous. It was about being reminded why we do this work in the first place. She implemented immediate changes to the intake process, personally rewriting the information packets to include clear checklists for all required forms. Keanu never commented publicly on the incident. Margaret, when approached by reporters, simply said, "He saw me when no one else did." That's what matters, being seen. A month later, the Social Services Office unveiled a new client assistance program with senior volunteer advocates, helping elderly applicants navigate paperwork. The training manual included a simple quote on its cover, "Policy matters. People matter more." Those who were there that rainy morning still speak of it, not as a celebrity sighting, but as a moment when the distance between people momentarily vanished. In a world quick to record but slow to help, the memory remains. Sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply to stand beside someone who feels alone and say, with actions more than words, "I see you. You matter. You are not alone." And sometimes even heroes need reminding of their power to be human, Wow, what a story! If this moved you, imagine what else we have for you. Hit that like button, drop a comment, and let us know what you think.